Hi there, my name's Jake, and today we're going to be doing an After Effects tutorial with ProductionCrate, talking about combining different stock elements and a few compositing techniques to create a cool explosion shot. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we're going to be creating. All right, so lots of fun. We've got the big walking robot and the explosion and the shockwave. We got this cool drone as seen on the ProductionCrate website. This big walking robot also, the scary thing, is also from the ProductionCrate website. It's just 10 of these guys stacked on top of one another to look a little extra scary. Pretty much everything that we use in this tutorial is all going to be able to be found on the ProductionCrate website, such as our hero explosion. So make sure you go check out some of these assets. We'll talk more about these later as we get into them in the tutorial. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. All right, so here we are in Adobe After Effects. The first thing we want to do is import our footage as well as this render of our big robot. If you're going to be following along, these are both available online for you to download. So let's click import. Let's grab our footage, drag it down here for a new composition, and we're ready to get started. If you scrub through, you see John, he's walking, and boom, big explosion in the background. If you zoom in here, you can see our shot is not on a tripod. It's not completely locked off. So we're going to need to track our background. So in order to do that, we need to come over here to the right and look for our tracker window. If you don't see that, come up here to window and look for the check mark next to tracker. So with our footage selected, let's click track motion and let's find a point of high contrast in the background. I'm going to choose the tip of this tree here, and then I'm going to click this play button which says analyze forward. Now as soon as that's done, we're going to need to create a null object to apply this data to. So let's come up here to layer, new, and choose null object. Now let's click the edit target button to make sure that our null is selected. If you don't see our new null here, just click the drop down and select it from the list. Hit OK, and now we have to click apply and then click OK again on X and Y. Now our movement from our background has been transferred to our null, so we're going to be able to parent assets to this, and anything we put in our frame will look like it's locked to our footage. So that's going to be very helpful as we move along. All right, let's go ahead and add in our giant robot. So that way John here has a threat that he's stopping with the explosion and doesn't go from being a hero to just some sort of criminal. So I'm gonna go ahead and make this a little bit bigger, place it on the horizon line, and now there's a couple things we need to do to make this a little bit more integrated. As you can see, it's just kind of floating on top of the frame. So we need to use that null that we created in the last step to stick this to our background. So I'm gonna find the parent link section, which is kind of right around here. And if you don't see that, you can toggle the switches with this button because sometimes it's hidden. I'm gonna grab this, which is called the pick whip, and drag it to the null. And now our robot should be stuck to the background. Next, one thing that happens when things are big and far away is there's some haze on them. They're not always so contrasty like this. So I'm gonna need to add a curves adjustment and match the colors a little bit. Now, quick warning, in this tutorial, I'm going to be using a free plugin from Video Copilot called FX Console. You can find this online, download it, install it, it's totally free. I recommend it, it has sped up my workflow tremendously. So what that's gonna allow me to do is hit Control Space to bring up a little search window and search for curves and hit enter and apply any effects I want that way. Now, if you don't have FX Console or you don't want to install it, you just need to come over here to the Effects and Presets tab, click in the search window and search for curves over here and drag it to the effects controls on this side. It's the same, I just find FX Console to be a little quicker and smoother, so I'm gonna be using this for the tutorial. So again, Control Space, search for curves, hit enter, and curves should pop up here. So let's grab this bottom point, drag it up a little bit higher until the contrast seems to start matching. Now I'm gonna go to the red channel, add in a little bit of warm tones, go to the blue channel and pull out some of the blue tones. That's looking pretty good. We're gonna leave that right there for now. So now the next thing I want to do is grab our explosion assets from ProductionCrate.com. So I'm going to type in explosion into the search window, and I'm going to grab a couple of these ultimate explosions. So how about this first one? It's labeled 21. Click download, save. And how about this one here? This looks pretty cool, 23. Download and save. Now back here in Adobe After Effects, we're going to go to the project window, double click in the empty space. You can see the two explosions we downloaded, so I'm going to grab those both and click import. Now I'm going to drag out our first one, number 21, into the composition window. I'm going to go to the moment where John here reacts, and I'm going to bring the explosion so that way it goes off at a time that makes sense with our actor's reaction. So I'm going to place this here above our giant robot, and again we need to parent this to our null. So let's grab the pick whip, connect it to our null, and if we hit play, that's already looking pretty cool. Now let's take a moment to match the color of our explosion to the color of our shot, similar to how we did with our robot. So I'm going to click our explosion, Control Space, add a curves adjustment. Again, let's bring up this bottom tab so the contrast starts matching. I'm noticing there's a lot more blue in the explosion than there was in the robot. So let's go to our blue channel and let's start pulling that down some. And I'm going to go to the red channel and boost that just a little bit. And I think that's looking pretty good for now. The other thing I want to point out is in our original shot from the short that we showed earlier, there was actually kind of a double explosion effect. So there was the primary one that went off at his feet, boom, and then a second later, another one exploded behind the mech. So I'm going to go back to the project panel, grab the second explosion that we had, bring that down here, and I'm going to actually put it below the mech. So it's now on layer 3. I'm going to drag that out so it kind of starts going off right around here, around frame 40. And I'm going to put that off to the right, maybe right there. Again, we need to parent this to the null, so use that pick whip. And I also want to copy the curves adjustment from explosion 21. So let's come over to the effects controls, click the curves, click Control C, and then I want to select explosion 23 and hit paste. Now, before we go too much further, let's zoom in here and take a look at this first explosion. It's actually going on top of our actor, and we need to fix that. So grab your footage, hit Control D to duplicate it, and put the copy on top of the explosions. Now, let's grab our Rotobrush tool at the top, double click this copy that we just put on the top, and let's start selecting our actor. So you're just gonna draw these green lines and try and grab all of him. If there's any part that you don't want, hold Alt, and that will allow you to subtract it. Now, once you've got a pretty good selection, hit the spacebar to start playing it and check out how it's capturing our actor. This is gonna work just fine for what we need it for. So once you're confident, you can hit this freeze button and wait for that to finish. Now, once that's finished, it's gonna turn this bluish purple color, indicating that it's no longer trying to update every time you hit play. It's locked on our current selection. So let's click back over into our composition window at the top. And if we solo layer 1, you'll notice that we have our actor chopped out. So that's gonna come in handy for a lot of these assets that we're placing. And you'll notice that our explosion is now underneath him. So what we have right now doesn't look too bad, and it could work, but there's a lot more we could do to this to make it more realistic that would just kind of spice up the shot overall. So let's grab a handful of more assets that are gonna be useful. The first of which I think are gonna be some small dirt explosions to cover up this harsh edge down here at the bottom and integrate it more with the ground, which is kind of this brown color. So I'm gonna come back here to the ProductionCrate website. I'm gonna type in dirt, and let's go ahead and grab this one, Small Dirt Blast. Let's download that. And I'm also going to grab this one here, Small Dirt Blast Angled, because that's kind of a cool little directional piece. So again, back over to the project panel, double click. Let's grab our two dirt explosions that we found. Click import, and I'm gonna grab the first one, bring it out here below our roto layer. And I'm also gonna give our roto layer a new color, just so we know that this one always stays on top. So I'm gonna grab this dirt, parent it to the null, just like all the other assets. Let's scale it down some, place it here at the feet where the explosion goes off, and let's slide it on our timeline so it starts at the same time as our explosion. That's looking pretty good. I'm also going to hit Control Space, add a curves adjustment, and Let's match the color of our ground a little bit. So less contrast, a little more warm tones, pull out the blue in the mids, and we'll go ahead and call that good. Now, one of them does just fine because this edge is now feeling a little bit more organic if we zoom out compared to how it was before. However, I know I'm gonna wanna cover most of this edge with a variety of different sizes of our assets. So what we can do is click this, hit Control D, and then just slide it to a different spot. Maybe we'll make it a little bit bigger. Duplicate it again, and we're just gonna go around doing this a couple times. Another tip I can give you guys is if you duplicate one of these layers, come over to the project panel, select the other dirt asset that we imported, and click and drag it on top while holding Alt. It will swap out the clips, keeping the parent information as well as the curves adjustment. So that's just like a quick little shortcut for you. So that's looking pretty cool. We've got a bunch of these placed in there, and the edge is starting to look a little more organic. However, we just have these dirt spots sitting on top. So again, we're gonna be thinking about this in terms of layers. We've broken up our bottom edge, but now we wanna break up some of these dirt textures. So let's grab another instance of some cool smoke and place it on top of that. So again, back to ProductionCrate. Let's go up to the top and let's try dust. I'm gonna click into this debris bursts category, which has some of the assets we were looking at earlier. And I found this really cool one down here, this Desert Sandy Explosion 3. And I think this is gonna work well for us. So let's download that, import it into our After Effects project, bring it out onto our timeline below the roto layer, parent it to the null, position and scale it. And I know I don't want this bottom part where the explosion initially happens. So I'm gonna come up here, select and hold, and grab our rectangular mask tool. And let's mask out the bottom of this asset. Change the mask from add to subtract. Hit F on the keyboard to bring up the feather properties, and let's feather that out some so the edge is a little more organic. Grab our selection tool, and let's position this. I think that looks pretty good right around there. Now let's match it to the color of our ground. So I'm gonna add a new effect we haven't used called tritone. So let's grab the eyedropper for our midtone color and select one of these darker areas on the ground. Maybe we can adjust this color manually till it feels right. That's looking pretty good. And we can even cheat this a little bit by hitting T on the keyboard and lowering the opacity some. So somewhere around 75% should be good. So that's looking pretty nice. This edge is definitely a lot more organic than it was before, but we have this small issue where our dirt layers just disappear halfway through this effect. So a quick way to make them last till the end of our composition is just to grab all of them at once, right click, go to time, and then choose Enable Time Remapping. Then what we need to do is grab all of these ending keyframes and slide them out beyond the end of our timeline, and then grab the edge of all of these clips and slide those out too. So now they're not gonna disappear as the timeline plays, they're gonna stay until the very end. Now, one of the last things we need to do is work on the different parts of our shockwave, and then we can add some camera shake, and then I think we'll be about done. So let's start on this big outer blast first. And you guessed it, we're heading back to ProductionCrate to search for a shockwave asset. So let's type that in at the top. And we're gonna be able to make use of this first one here, Air Shockwave Burst 1. So go ahead and download that. Back in After Effects, double click to import, find Air Shockwave and import. Drag that out onto our timeline, and we're gonna wanna put that below all of our previous assets, just right above our footage. Let's drag that over so it starts at the beginning of the explosion, and scale it down a bit. And just like every asset before it, we need to parent it to null 1. Now by default, this asset is pretty see-through, so let's go ahead and fix that by adding a curves adjustment. So I'm gonna add curves, go to the alpha channel, and let's boost that up a bit. There it is, we're able to see that a little bit better now. So a couple things to note, the first of which is that we're losing it on the edge over here, so I do actually need to scale it up again. So let's bring that so it at least extends outside our frame. Reposition it so it's on the explosion itself. That's looking pretty good. And now you're gonna notice that it extends off into the sky, which is obviously not ideal. So let's cheat that with a little position keyframe. So I'm gonna go to right around here, hit P on the keyboard, create a keyframe by clicking the stopwatch, go to the end of the clip where it's about gone, and let's slide it down some. Now if we play that back, that's looking pretty good to me. So now that we have this placed, I'm actually gonna turn down the alpha just a touch, and then I'm gonna duplicate this, right click on the second copy, go to time, go to time stretch and set this to 200. So now this is gonna play twice as slow. So it kind of gives us this double shockwave effect, which I think looks pretty cool. Now this second copy that's playing slightly slower, what I wanna do is add a box blur to that. So type in box, and it's this first one, fast box blur. I'm gonna set this blur radius to somewhere around like 25. And that just gives us a subtle aftershock, which I think looked pretty cool in the original example. However, you're gonna notice that with the slowed down clip, there is this like frame stuttering. So in order to fix that, what I'm actually gonna do is click this button here, this empty checkbox 2 times. 1, 2. It creates this little arrow symbol, which is gonna do some frame interpolation. So now it'll take longer to load, but it'll play a lot smoother. Now the last part of this big shockwave is actually just created from a solid in order to brighten up the initial explosion. So I'm gonna hit Control Y on the keyboard to create a new solid, set the color to white, click OK. And now I'm going to scale this up a little bit bigger than my composition window, just so there's room for it to slide around. Parent it to null 1, same as everything else. And let's click and hold and select the ellipse mask tool. Hold Control to draw a circle out from the center of this explosion. If you want the circle to be perfect, you hold Shift, and let's make it about this big. Now with that solid selected, let's hit MM on the keyboard to bring up the mask properties. And let's go to the beginning of the explosion and shrink the mask expansion down until the circle is gone. Set a keyframe, move forward 10 or 15 frames, and let's bring the mask expansion all the way up so the circle fills the whole frame. Now next what we can do is duplicate this mask by hitting Control D, set the second copy to subtract, and then slide the second keyframe of the second mask over some to create this ring shape. Now let's go back up to our toolbar and grab the rectangular mask tool, zoom out some here, and I'm gonna draw a rectangular mask roughly around the horizon, and then set that to subtract. So we've created this interesting shape that extends from the explosion. Now let's feather it out some more so it looks more organic. Hit F on the keyboard to bring up the feather properties of all of your masks, and just start increasing those to taste. Somewhere around 100 pixels looks pretty good to me. Now let's hit T on the keyboard to bring up the opacity, and let's set that somewhere pretty low, maybe around 20%. And it's subtle, but there's the big outer part of our shockwave. So let's move on to the dust that flies at our actor across the ground. And that's gonna be made up of 3 different assets. So it's gonna be this one here, the Dusty Shockwave front. Download that, scroll down here. This one called Shockwave Perspective 3, download that. And then let's come up here to the top and type in dust, go to the specialty category, and then it's this first one here titled Atmosphere Towards Cam. So let's grab that as well. So let's go back to After Effects, import our 3 new assets, and let's first bring out this Dusty Shockwave front. I'm gonna put this below our roto layer, but above everything else. Parent it to null 1, which by the way, you don't have to use the pick whip if your list is getting long. You can click this drop down and just find your null. Let's slide it over so it starts at the beginning of the explosion, same as everything else. Scale it down some, bring it to the base. Let's drop the opacity by half. Let's add the tritone effect. And again, select that mid-tone color, grab something from the field. But because this asset is so bright and it has lots of these highlights, let's grab that color as well and select one of these lighter dusty colors. Next, let's grab our Shockwave Perspective 3. I'm gonna put this below all of our other assets. Parent it to the null, slide it over so it starts at the beginning of the explosion, and let's scale this one up really big so it fills the frame. And let's also squish it some so it appears to be more flat. Put this at the base of the explosion. And similar to our other Shockwave asset from earlier, we're gonna have to cheat this with a keyframe. So let's go to the beginning, hit P, click the stopwatch, and let's slide all the way until it looks like the shockwave is finished moving, and let's slide it down some. Now I'm gonna add the tritone effect to this one as well. Grab that highlight color, and again, click one of these lighter areas. And maybe that's just a bit too dark, so I'm gonna go and manually edit it to be just a touch brighter. Somewhere around there looks good. And lastly, let's go ahead and grab our atmosphere toward cam and let's put it on top of everything, but right below our roto layer. Parent it to the null, slide it over so it starts at the beginning of the explosion. Let's reposition it some. And I'm gonna go to where the explosion is at its biggest, hit T on the keyboard, and let's change the opacity to 50%, click the stopwatch, and let's go to the beginning of the explosion and set the opacity to 0. So that's just gonna slowly fade on over time and look like some dust has been kicked off the ground by that residual shockwave. Same as our other asset, the color is just a little bit too white, so we can actually select that, go to the effects controls, grab the tritone, hit Control C, click back on our atmosphere asset and hit Control V. And I also want to brighten this one up manually too. Now I'm feeling really happy with this, and I think we've pretty much got our asset bases covered. So let's go ahead and pre-compose all of this so we can add some camera shake, some glow, some color correction, and then we'll call it good. So grab your top layer, scroll all the way down to the bottom, hold Shift and select your last layer, and then hit Control Shift C on the keyboard to pre-compose. I'm gonna call this Composite. So now all of this has been brought into a pre-comp that we can access later, and it's gonna make this a lot easier since we're just dealing with one layer now. All right, now let's go ahead and take care of the camera shake. We're gonna be using a script from ProductionCrate, so you can head over to the website and download it from the link here. Now back in After Effects, in order to run the script, we need to go to File, Scripts, and choose Run Script File. Navigate to the camera shake script and hit Open. This little dialog pops up with tons of great little options. I'll just show you some that worked for me. Select your composite layer, go to the moment where the explosion first starts, change it from shake to jolt. I liked jolt number 2, and let's turn the amplitude up to somewhere around 3.5, the frequency down quite a bit, maybe around like 0.7. Let's change skip keys to 2, that'll just make it a little more gradual. And I'm gonna turn off auto scale just so I can show you how to fix this manually as another little quick tip. Now let's hit jolt, and this is just a warning telling you that it's gonna take a minute to load, so it's okay, just hit continue. And we can also now exit out of this dialog. Now if you play this back, it's looking pretty cool. We have this nice big bump when the explosion goes off. Now the reason I turned off auto scale is because sometimes you might find yourself in a situation where your footage has been slid off the screen and you're left with these black borders where there's no more footage to be shown. Now you can just scale this up, but then you're gonna be losing some of the footage that you worked so hard to make look cool, so that's not always an ideal solution. So there's an effect that we can use to quickly solve this called motion tile. So let's add the motion tile effect. Then we need to select mirror edges. Then we need to change the output width and output height to something that's going to cover those black edges. So call it around 150 each. Now let's go ahead and add the glow. But if we just put the glow effect on our footage, we're gonna affect the sky and some of the ground and a lot of these other bright parts of the frame too. So what we need to do is isolate just the orange in the explosion. So a quick way to do that is to duplicate the composite, solo the top one, and let's add the key light effect to it. Now this is usually for green screens, but we're gonna use it in a weird way right now. So grab the screen color, select one of your oranges, then toggle open the screen matte, and we need to play with these settings until we can mostly isolate just the orange. Now that's looking pretty good to me. Let's add a fast box blur, set the blur radius to around 100 pixels, and then let's add the tint effect and set the white color to something in the orange fiery range, something maybe around there. We can unsolo this now and set the transfer mode. If you don't see the transfer mode, again, we can toggle switches to unhide it. Set that to screen, and there we go. We just have a very quick, subtle glow effect applied just to the oranges in our explosion. And last but not least, let's go ahead and add some color correction. So I'm gonna go to Layer, New, Adjustment Layer, and to this adjustment layer on top, I'm going to add a Curves adjustment. Let's go ahead and bring our midtones down some, bring our highlights up to add some contrast. Maybe we can go to the blue channel and add some blues in the shadows, but pull it out of the highlights and midtones. And maybe we can do the same for the reds, except let's pull it out of the shadows and add it to the midtones. And maybe we can throw the vignette effect on this, turn the amount down some, and then maybe a levels adjustment right on top to dial in our contrast just a little bit more. And if you want, you can maybe throw a hue and saturation adjustment on top of that. And let's change the channel control from master to reds. And let's make our explosion a little more orange, maybe 5 degrees on the hue angle and a little bit less saturated. And if you hit this visibility icon, you can see the before and after. I think that looks pretty cool. And I think that's where we're gonna leave it for the tutorial. This turned out pretty cool in my opinion. If there's one thing that we can take away from this, it's to think in terms of layers, right? So you need to put down your base explosion or whatever your hero asset is, and then just build from there. Think logically. The explosion goes off, what's next? How about some dirt? The shockwave comes flying out. How about it kicks up some dust on the ground? Then there's some residual smoke, and so on and so on. Never constrain yourself to a single asset, and always be thinking about these as puzzle pieces you can put together to make something bigger. But anyway, thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and we'll see you in the next one.